Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to talk a little bit about Nike, its ethics, its brand reputation, specifically mostly related to its stance and policies on labor. Um, the thesis of my presentation is basically that Nike was infamous for problematic labor practices in the 90s. They had kind of a superstar on staff in Hannah Jones who really transformed their labor practices. And unfortunately, when they lost her in 2021, we're seeing some resurgence in problematic labor practices from Nike at this time. So, we're going to talk about the ethical issues that Nike was experiencing in the 90s, and then I'll try to highlight which ones are reemerging right now. In the 90s, Nike famously lost a lot of public credibility over its labor practices, and the word sweatshops was everywhere in the news. And Nike was a main offender that it hired people overseas who worked for extremely low wages, extremely long hours, in conditions that would not be legal in the United States. And they also used child labor in some of these factories. The workers had virtually no power in the situation, and there were extensive rights violations in terms of Catholic social teaching. People were being treated very poorly. They had no bargaining rights, and entire communities were harmed by Nike's labor practices. The issue that emerged, and the reason Nike caught so much flack for this, is that there was a gap between their branding and their labor realities on the ground. And we're going to talk more about that in a few slides. So, this slide. So, Nike, the brand and their marketing, emphasized empowerment, this idea that anyone can be successful if you just try hard, you can achieve your dreams. And this was especially powerful in very poor communities in the United States where Nike made a ton of money, especially on Jordans. But then on the other side, overseas, they are treating underprivileged workers deplorably and setting them up in horrible life situations with no opportunity for growth. So I love this word. We're going to call it a decoupling between their actual labor practices and their public persona. So in the 90s, this had a really terrible impact on Nike's brand reputation. And the banner you see there is from a protest that happened in the 90s. And again, Hannah Jones was brought on staff, and there were a lot of changes that Nike made at that time, which we'll go over. But unfortunately, this slide is specifically in reference to the problems that they're having right now, 2024 anyway. So in 2024, Nike faced objections from investors over specifically the way they treated their employees in Southeast Asia during the COVID timeframe. And this ESG rating, which is the environmental, social, and governance rating that many companies receive a rating, but Nike was downgraded on this specifically because of its labor practices. So again, not environmental, but related to social and governance problems that came up during the COVID timeframe. So their overall sustainability credibility is weakened because these three elements are grouped together in an ESG rating. So the environmental, for better or worse, is coupled with labor practices. I think in some ways this is for better, and in many ways it's for worse. So once again, just like in the 90s, whatever innovations, or especially environmental innovations that Nike has created, become overshadowed by their problematic labor practices. So back in 2005, how did Nike address this problem? They Hannah Jones created the Factory Transparency Initiative. Of course, this was in Everybody's Business, where she talked about how they published a complete list of all their factories, their locations, and who made up the workforce in those factories. They also made certain rules about, who could work in a factory. You had to be over 18, and we'll go on in the future slides to talk about other efforts in terms of accountability of their contractors. But all of the efforts they made in terms of accountability with their labor practices were focused on disclosure and transparency and didn't impact what Nike was doing in terms of marketing. So this again goes back to the previous slide. Branding, impact branding, which is Nike, a lot of companies create branding surrounding their impact, like how are they, their corporate social responsibility. And again, because related to this ESG rating, Nike embeds their labor practices into their sustainability messaging so that the end result is that you hear a lot about Nike and their sustainability efforts, but since labor is kind of coupled in there, labor just kind of gets lost in the messaging. So in 2005, going more into their response, they started releasing impact reports. They started implementing codes of conduct for their suppliers. So their downstream contractors had to comply with codes of conduct. Then they sent people there to audit those and enforce those. And they made certain public commitments towards human rights. So what's good about this is that they were being transparent. What a limitation of this posture is that it's highly reactive and it's not proactive. So looking at it from a Catholic perspective, the labor problems that Nike unfortunately has a hard time breaking away from have to do with only partial human dignity support and insufficient empowerment of employees. So employees should have a voice and should have some sort of negotiating power. In this case, the workers are underprivileged and so don't have much bargaining power. So this diminishes the dignity and rights of workers. In terms of Benedictine values, obviously, when you have someone working for below poverty wages, it is not respectful to the person or the community. And then in terms of Nike's stewardship of their resources, they are human resources. They're making vast profits while paying very little to the people that create those products. So my recommendations. First of all, I think that Nike should market ethics directly. So labor ethics rather. So they should, more than just talking about their sustainability practices as a whole, focusing on environmental impact, they should also directly market their fair labor practices. I think that would force them to be more fair. I would like to see them expand the voice of their workers, especially in Southeast Asia, that those workers have the right to engage in negotiations and to make demands of management. I think that Nike, while it focuses, again, sustainability on environmental impact, I think it should refocus its thinking to understand that true sustainability centers on human dignity, and that if they're not treating people fairly, then they're not truly advancing sustainability. I would like to see Nike publish living wage benchmarks. So in every country where it has suppliers and contractors, it should publish what are the living wages in those countries and what are they paying their employees in those countries. And then, I'd like to see them tie executive pay to labor outcomes. So meaning if, for example, Nike experiences downgrades because of their labor practices and these ESG ratings, that should impact executive pay. So executives should have some skin in the game. So these are my resources here. I want to just say, if you look at this Reuters, about halfway down, this Reuters article from 2024 is where I'm largely getting my information about Nike's recent problems, resurgence of recent problems. I guess I didn't explicitly say what the issue was. So during COVID, they shut down factories. Um, well, first people were sent home for quarantine. And then after a certain number of weeks and months, those factories were ultimately shut down. But Nike never paid its workers, specifically in Cambodia and Taiwan, for the time that they were quarantined. So they were still employees of the factory. They were on quarantine with the promise of work resuming. However, when Nike's demand decreased due to COVID, they eventually let those employees go and never paid them for that time. And that was a significant abuse and an unfair labor practice. And so this Reuters article focuses on those issues, and those are the issues that ultimately led to their downgrade of their ESG rating. So thank you very much, and everybody have a great week.